Hey, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the Global Trade Tech Forum. My name's Greg Miller. I'm a senior editor with FreightWaves and American Shipper. And today I'm joined by Pervinder Johar, CEO of Bloom Global. Pervinder, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, glad to have you. Now, Bloom Global provides visibility on cargo. It provides better decision-making capabilities on cargo movements, and it provides for better cargo transport execution. And it's across all modes, but today we're going to be focusing primarily on ocean. And what a year it's been for ocean. I mean, if you think about the disruptions to global trade from COVID, I'm really interested in hearing what you've heard from your customers. I'm just a journalist here in New York. Your customers have been on the front lines for all of this. But before we get to COVID, Pervinder, I'm wondering if you could give me sort of a broad overview of Bloom Global and the platform and what it provides.
We actually launched Bloom Global in 2018, so a little over 2 years back, 2.5 years back. Anything and everything we thought we were going to do as a platform this year has been a true test of how well the platform is working. If I can take you back to 2018, Greg, at that time, the whole premise was that there is no one who had actually built a digital operating platform for global supply chains, which goes across all modes of transportation, and it's inherently focused on international intermodal logistics and supply chain. So I remember talking to kind of our board at that time, telling them that it's not going to be simple to go build, and it's going to require a lot of capital. Actually, I asked for $100 million of R&D spend back in 18. We have spent about 60 plus million on R&D so far, still on our journey to continue to invest on the platform. But over the last 2 years, it's been a fairly successful global platform. We are now have customers operating in over 130 countries. As you mentioned, it's focused on both visibility and execution. Right? So it's a true operating platform for all modes of transportation. We have over 10,000 logistics service providers who are now connected to the platform in every country you can possibly imagine, on Asia side, on Europe, in US. So it's been fun building this platform, and there's a big journey ahead of us.
Yeah, and I can imagine what's going on this year is a real stress test. It's almost like a trial by fire, and it really is an opportunity for you to prove the value of the platform. So let's start talking about COVID and your customers. And I sort of simplistically divide the fallout into 3 stages or 3 phases. And phase 1, I would say, would be February, March, right after Chinese New Year. U.S. importers were expecting the Chinese New Year's break, but because of the outbreak in Wuhan, essentially, that break was a month longer than they had anticipated, so their shipments were delayed. At the same time, there was refrigerated cargo that was being exported from the United States to China, and that got diverted elsewhere in Asia because all the reefer plugs at the Chinese terminals were filled up because the Chinese trucks couldn't bring them inland. So there was that disruption. At the same time, we had the air cargo disruption where the passenger planes were not able to go into service. So we lost the belly capacity there. The air freight spot rates went up. A lot of that cargo went into premium ocean. And finally, we had containers strewn all over the world. We had this equipment issue where a lot of containers weren't where they were not supposed to be. There were too many containers in one place, not enough containers in another. So that sets the stage for this phase 1. What were your customers telling you about this aspect of the fallout, and how did your system help them cope with it?
So actually, Greg, we started seeing it. I will take you a little bit further back in 2019. And if you remember, COVID, the changes have been unprecedented on what happened in Q1. But even last year, with the tariff issues and then kind of the trade talks between US and China and other countries, we were starting to see what I call kind of hurry up and wait type of an attitude kind of on the supply chain side. The date for when the tariffs were going to go into effect kept on changing, which meant that kind of we saw bigger ships, people got more loaders, but just because you get more loaders or a bigger ship, it doesn't really make kind of your chassis or the drayage capacity go up, or the rail cargo, how it moves. All of those needs to be synchronized and coordinated. So we were kind of practicing with our customers back in 2019 that how do you go handle this volatility in supply chains, especially for international ocean cargo, and how do you become more agile and use a digital platform for it. And in Q1, it just accelerated. Even in Q1, I actually break it up into two parts, even there. Something before March 14th and after March 14th. See, till March 14th, it was mostly a China kind of issue, as you described, that how do I go get kind of goods from China, and then how do I go manage the cargo, which couldn't really land, or shouldn't say land, couldn't really dock in China at that time. But I remember 14 very well, right? So I was in New York City meeting with one of our large kind of freight forwarder customers. I think of them as the top 5 freight forwarders. We had lunch, we had discussion about, yes, kind of things are volatile, right? But still are manageable kind of from a digital perspective. But then came that weekend, and on March 17th, here in California, everyone was working from home. So the very first lesson out of it was that for our customers, see, we provide a digital platform for us as a company. Everyone was kind of up and running, similar to FreightWaves to some extent, kind of the next day, right? But for our customers who were truly using the digital platform, they saw it kind of more of a business continuity issue, which is what I will call it on Q1. And on that side, it was that can we keep it up and running kind of on an ongoing basis, and how do you go manage kind of those first few weeks too. As you know, we do fair amount of domestic rail intermodal logistics as well. And we saw kind of, again, you had essential goods and essential workers. So the demand kind of fluctuated a lot, both on the ocean side and on the rail side, which kind of go together in our mind, right? Because half of what comes onto ocean comes onto rail, or vice versa in US. But from the platform perspective, and I think I remember one of our customers telling us, and if actually it's a quote, I can't say the name of the customer, but they said in this time of uncertainty, the only thing we can count on is kind of how Bloom has actually supported us, and how kind of everything was seamless in terms of operating our logistics platform during that phase 1.
Well, you mentioned the shutdown, and that's sort of in my mind, when I think of stage 2 or phase 2, to me it's roughly the second quarter. And this was when we had the shutdown in the US, and US importers started canceling their orders, pulling back on their orders. The container lines responded by blanking or canceling sailings. And so we had about 15 to 20% of the inbound sailings from Asia to the US canceled in the second quarter. And we saw at the end of the second quarter, what we saw was a different dynamic where U.S. demand actually exceeded the vessel supply. It exceeded expectations. And so you started to see the cargo rolling. You started to see the extra loaders being added. You started to see the sailings that were blanked being unblanked. So the theme in this sort of phase 2, to me, was really about the uncertainties of when U.S. importers could get their cargo in this changing situation. So during this period, what were your customers saying, and how did they deal with that uncertainty of getting the cargo in when they needed it?
I think so. Part of it, if you think of the phase 2 age, you needed to know what sailings are going to get canceled and when. You knew they were coming, right? So it was not kind of, it was known that they're coming, but you just didn't know which ones are going to get canceled. So one of the things we do as a platform is that we provide all sailing schedules around the world, including we have connectivity to other platforms where you know where every vessel is and how it is moving, and we use a lot of kind of machine learning and artificial intelligence to keep track of all of these things behind the scenes. And then the impact, Greg, was not only on imports, it was equally on exports too. As you know, these two things are interlinked, right? And then exports are even more complicated, right? Because you have to worry about, especially if it is going on rail, a marine container on rail. The only person who can do a rail billing is actually a truck driver or a trucking company after they have picked up a full container. And then you have all these issues around ERD and detention and demurrage charges, right? So they also start piling up here too. So it almost was that kind of from our customer perspective and platform perspective is that you are in a orchestra or symphony, right, where you're trying to coordinate and orchestrate all of these moving pieces, which start off with knowing which sailing is a blank sailing, what's the impact kind of on an import, what's the impact on the export, what does it really mean for our export customers, that kind of when should they be actually picking up, or when should they be telling kind of a trucking company to pick up a full container, or even an empty container, because remember container detention becomes a big issue as well, because there's so many financial impact of this orchestration that we did kind of in that phase too. The other thing that happened, Greg, was we actually saw, kind of from volumes perspective, we saw that the e-commerce activity picked up significantly even in Q2. If you think of high-tech customers of ours, right? Now, see, every company all of a sudden was two things. One was that they were a digital company because their employees couldn't come to work, which means things like laptops and high-tech equipment, the demand went up. And second, everyone was an e-commerce company. Because you couldn't go to the store, you couldn't do regular buying, right? So all the warehouses in the US, all of a sudden, they had become, they used to be kind of separate warehouses for many customers, for e-commerce versus store. But all of a sudden, every warehouse was now an e-commerce kind of activity too. So you could predict it because we were looking at some of the forecasting algorithms, and we were telling our customers that come June, July, you're actually going to see a different behavior, right, than what you're seeing now. But all the early signs were there, and the platform was actually able to give people, customers, kind of an indication of what's to come. Not everyone reacted on it, but we were able to see it, and we were able to predict that something is going to change in June, July, August time period.
And that's exactly what happened. I mean, that brings us to sort of the phase three, which is what we're right in the smack in the middle of now, which is the third quarter. And what happened here was demand was so high that all of the carriers put all of their capacity back in, and they even added more capacity. But despite all of that capacity being added, we have record rates, spot rates on the Trans-Pacific now, and we have some real problems with importers getting their goods in. And so the real theme here in this phase three is there's a lot of congestion. There's a lot of issues at the terminals. And we also have this sort of container equipment issue where containers are not where they're supposed to be, the same as we had in phase one. So this is the kind of period of time where I would think a platform like yours would really provide some value added. So, just walk us through what happened here and what's happening now.
Yeah. Actually, I will break it up into a couple of different type of issues that popped up with this change in phase three. First was just the availability of the assets, right? Both on the import side and export side, and assets would be chassis and containers, and kind of how do you get street visibility on where these assets are. So we as a platform, one of our focus is on this asset visibility and also enabling what we call street turns, meaning that how do you maximize the utilization of the assets and let people on the network, because we have both importers and exporters, or logistic freight forwarders who do both import and export. How do you give them visibility, the street visibility, to know where the assets are, so that you can get them when you need it? And then this phase three has really shown that you can't rely on just the assets being at the rail terminals or container yards or the ocean terminals. You have to think of every distribution center, every manufacturing location as a asset location, and how do we go and optimize those components too. The second part of it has been, how do I go find capacity? especially on the ocean rage. The interesting part is that in US, there are about 7,000, 6,900 or so motor carriers, rage companies. Only seven of them have more than 100 million in revenue. So there are a lot of capacity which is really tied up, and it's a very, very long tail, right? So we talk about truckload, that there's a tail on that side, right? But this one looks like that majority of the rage carriers are all on the tail side. When we talk about there's only seven or so with more than 100 million in revenue, there's a lot of kind of those players. And when I talk about the logistics service providers, in US, we are connected to 5,100 of these gray motor carriers where they can receive work orders from us. They can do dynamic pricing. You can go find capacity. So our customers who were using the network were able to go find capacity, right? Versus, and this is almost a reverse of kind of what used to happen 20 years back, where people looked at it, I want only 5 motor carriers or 10 motor carriers. In US, you can't really do it for ocean rage, right? Because there are not that many kind of companies which operate throughout the country on every port, every terminal. So how do you go and find that connection? So that's the second thing our customers saw, that you need to link those two things up. And the third thing, which has been related to, is again the impact on exports as a result of kind of what's going on the import side. And so we saw that the dwell time was increasing. Right? So people were keeping containers and chassis longer. So just because kind of more ships came in, didn't really mean that warehouses could handle all of the capacity you're trying to unload those containers. Because as you know, kind of labor is still in somewhat short supply because of COVID and the social distancing requirements, and the throughput is still down for the warehouses to begin with. And for us as a platform, it has been again, how do we tell you what's going on your supply chain end to end? If we talk US in particular, kind of how do you know what's going on today? How do you predict what will happen tomorrow? And then how do you go and kind of implement policies and procedures which allow you to automate the decision making? So there are many success stories kind of in this time period for our customer base. Unfortunately, I don't want to take any customer names, right? So if you go, because it gets tricky to talk about a specific customer situation. But broadly, the platform has actually helped many of them. Many of them operate successfully in this time period.
Yeah, it's been such a crazy year, and we still have a couple months left, so we'll see how things go. I also wanted to talk about the future in the sense of, this has been a major shock to the system, and it's possible that it can convince some potential customers out there that maybe now is the time to invest in visibility IT. There was a big study that was put out by McKinsey in August looking at risks and resilience to the supply chain. And their case was basically that these kind of shocks to the system are increasing. They're going to continue to happen. So supply chains may have to become more regionalized. Secondarily, people may have to keep more inventory in stock. And thirdly, this may be the time where some of the people that have held back from investing in this kind of technology will finally see the error of their ways and realize that this isn't a cost and will go forward. And at the same time, there's always these headwinds to this. There's people that think short term and they think about the cost. So, have you seen any change in the way that potential customers are looking at systems like yours? And if you think back to the kind of things that have stopped them from doing it in the past, do you think that finally we may overcome some of these barriers?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, I will give you a couple of different examples. The first part has been that we used to get these shocks kind of about once a year, a couple of times a year. So I've spent a lot of time in supply chain. I worked for probably one of the largest high-tech companies at that time, kind of from 09 to 14 or so. And we used to see these shocks kind of when we had kind of Japanese earthquake. We had kind of the floods in Thailand. We had kind of on the air volcano that erupted in in Europe back in 10, 11 time period. So they used to happen once in a while, and people just said that, okay, I can deal with it with manual processing. Like air capacity. And air, no one cared about till the passenger belly kind of were gone, right? So 42% drop in air capacity in Q2 meant that people said, oh, maybe I need to spend more time on air visibility, not just on ocean, because before you took it for granted. If it's a flight from Shanghai to San Francisco, if you miss one, there are four others, and your cargo will somehow make it on the other side. So the focus for the customers, and this is kind of some of the leading supply chains in the world, has been on what I call supply chain orchestration, right? Which combines resiliency, meaning that can I absorb the shocks, with agility, meaning that can I be agile and resolve these exceptions on an ongoing basis, right? And then people are willing to invest in it more. Uh, Talking about visibility, though, right? So this has been a little bit interesting. And so, as you, I think, what was it? The saying goes that necessity is the mother of all inventions. Right? So from that perspective, right? So visibility became kind of a necessity thing to go do. But we at Bloom has a slightly different philosophy, correct? Right? So we say that visibility without execution is like going to a dentist, them telling you you have a cavity and telling you to go home. So if you do only a visibility platform, right? So it's almost is that you can know that you're going to be late, but the value is that you're not in that you're going to be late. How do I get back on time? Right? And a lot of the leading companies are now focused on with platform like ours, and which is why I call it an operating platform, not a visibility platform. That it kind of goes hand in hand. You want to see where things are, but you really want to make sure how do they get back on time. And I don't know if you saw this week the announcement from Walmart that OTIF is back and it needs to be 98%, right? So again, that's not focus on visibility. And it's back to focus on that on 98% of the time, you will be on time and full. Hope that gives you kind of a view of what our customers are doing with us today.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, the crisis this year would seem like a very strong argument to make these kind of changes, whether it be to re-examine your supply chain, or whether it be to change your inventory levels, or whether it be to implement some sort of technology like yours. But on the other hand, there are a lot of companies that are really just in the thick of it right now. I mean, this is a crisis mode, and they may be a bit on their heels, or they may be worried about the money, obviously, and they may have uncertainty about what's going to happen in the fall or the winter. So perhaps they're saying, well, maybe we understand the argument that we should be investing in these kind of platforms, but maybe now is not the time. Do you think that's true, or do you think they're convinced but they need to wait, or do you see people, especially the larger companies, going forward and making that change now?
I think some of the more progressive ones kind of are making those changes now, right? Because it almost says that if you're in supply chain, your primary job is operations. And when you're in this type of an environment, kind of the primary job is that how do I go deal with today? But at the same time, I call it kind of not even 80-20, 90-10 rule, right? Spend 90% of your time and energy on focusing on today, but at least use the 10% to talk about that how to never get into this place again, right? And which is where kind of the companies which are thinking that way are spending it. As you know, we are a cloud platform. There are other cloud platforms. So we don't talk about heavy software investments these days or hardware and other things to buy. So the world is a lot simpler in terms of trying platforms like Bloom now than it used to be kind of when I was doing my software systems kind of 20 years back or 10 years back. But it again is that kind of my advice would be do 90-10, focus 90% to deal with today, but at least kind of focus 10% of your time and your energy and your money on that how to not get into this situation if it happens again. And we know that it's not going to be COVID, it would be something else, but some things are going to continue to change kind of in this volatile world.
Yeah, something is always going to come up, and well, this has been so. It's obviously a very important year for logistics and for your company, and this has been very informative as I say, as a journalist, it's important for us to be speaking to people that are on the front lines, that are right in the middle of this business, and you're one of those people. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And once again, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.